That smell coming out of your drain isn't food. Food doesn't smell like that. What you're smelling is grease that's been sitting inside your pipe for months, rotting in the dark, growing bacteria that feed on it every single day. I've pulled that gunk out of hundreds of sinks with my bare hand, and I can tell you right now, pouring more dish soap down there isn't touching it. You're about to learn why that smell keeps coming back no matter how many times you clean the sink itself, why it always seems worse at night or first thing in the morning, and what actually gets rid of it for good, not just for a weekend. Here's what's really going on. You wipe the counter, you scrub the sink basin until it shines, maybe you even run the garbage disposal for a minute hoping that clears things out, and for a day or two it does seem better. Then the smell creeps back. Usually it's worse in the morning, right after the house has been quiet all night, or right after you run the dishwasher and that hot water pushes through the pipe and stirs everything up. Some people notice it most in the evening, after a full day of cooking, when the kitchen's warm and the air isn't moving much. Either way, it's not random. There's a pattern to it, and once you know the pattern, you can almost predict when it's going to hit. Most people don't catch this problem early because the visible part of the sink is clean. That's the trap. No pun intended, but it actually is the trap, both literally and figuratively. Your eyes tell you everything's fine because you can see the basin, the faucet, the disposal ring, the drain cover. All of it looks spotless, but you can't see 6 inches down into the P-trap or further down into the branch line where it connects to the main drain running through your wall or under your floor. That's where the real problem lives, and it's completely out of sight, which means it's completely out of mind for most homeowners until the smell gets bad enough that they can't ignore it anymore. I've been called into homes where the homeowner swore they'd tried everything: baking soda, vinegar, boiling water, 3 different store-bought drain cleaners, even those little gel packs you drop in and let dissolve overnight. And every time when I pulled the P-trap apart, there was a black, waxy buildup caked around the inside of that pipe, like a second skin. It's not a thin film either. I've seen it thick enough to cut the actual diameter of a 2-inch pipe down to less than an inch of usable space. That's not something soap touches. That's grease that's cooled, hardened, and bonded to the plastic or metal wall of the pipe. It sits there, it breaks down slowly, and it stinks the entire time it's doing it. And here's the part that surprises people the most. It's not just old grease from months ago sitting there doing nothing. It's building every single day you cook, actively, right now while you're watching this. Every time you rinse a pan, wipe a plate, or pour out the last bit of bacon fat because you didn't want to deal with a jar, you're adding another thin layer to that buildup. It doesn't happen all at once, and that's exactly why nobody notices it happening. It happens the same way a candle drips wax. Slow, steady, layer after layer, until one day there's enough of it in there to actually smell, and by that point, you're not dealing with a light coating anymore. You're dealing with months, sometimes years of accumulated residue. I want to give you a real example, because numbers on their own don't always land. I serviced a home a couple years back where the family had lived there for about 6 years, cooking regularly, never once had the trap cleaned or replaced. When I pulled it apart, the buildup was so thick that water was only trickling through a channel about the width of a pencil. 6 years of everyday cooking had narrowed a pipe that should have had a 2-inch clear opening down to almost nothing. The homeowner told me the smell had been manageable for the first 4 years and only became unbearable in the last 2. That's the timeline you're working with. It's slow, it's silent, and then it isn't. There's another detail worth mentioning here because it changes how urgent this actually is. That narrowing doesn't just cause smell, it causes slow drainage too. If you've noticed your sink taking longer to empty than it used to, that's not a separate issue from the smell. It's the same buildup, just showing you a second symptom. The pipe that's coated in grease is the same pipe that's now too narrow to let water pass through at full speed. So if you're dealing with both the smell and the sluggish drain, that's not a coincidence. And it's not 2 problems. It's one problem showing you 2 signs. I'll add one more sign people rarely connect to this, and it's the gurgling sound. If your sink makes a gurgling or bubbling noise when you run the dishwasher or when water drains out after washing dishes, that's air getting trapped and forced back up through a partially blocked line. People usually assume that's just how the pipes sound in an older house, something quirky about the plumbing they've learned to live with. It's not quirky. It's the same grease buildup we're talking about, narrowing the pipe enough that air can't move through freely alongside the water, so it pushes back up and makes that sound on its way out. Smell, slow drainage, and gurgling, those three symptoms almost always show up together, in that order, as the buildup gets worse over time. If you're only dealing with the smell right now and haven't noticed the other two yet, that's actually good news. It means you're catching this earlier than most people do, and the fix is going to be easier because of it. Grease and water do not mix, and that's the whole story right there. When you rinse a greasy pan under hot water, that fat is liquid because it's hot. It flows right down the drain looking completely harmless, almost invisible, just a slight shimmer on the water's surface if you're paying attention. But the second that water and grease hit the cooler pipe further down, and pipes under your sink are almost always cooler than your tap water, especially in an uninsulated cabinet where there's no heat source at all, the fat starts to solidify again. It's the exact same thing that happens when you pour bacon grease into a pan and let it sit on the counter, and give it 20 minutes and it turns solid white, almost like candle wax. Same chemistry, just happening inside your pipe where you can't see it and can't stop it. Once that grease solidifies against the pipe wall, it doesn't rinse away with normal use. Water running through the middle of the pipe just blows past it, the same way a river flows past a rock instead of wearing it down overnight. It doesn't scrub the sides with any real force. So that layer stays put, and every wash cycle adds a little more on top of it, thickening the coating instead of removing it. Over months, that thin film becomes a thick crust, and that crust isn't sterile. Bacteria love it. It's warm, it's damp, it's organic material sitting undisturbed in the dark, which is exactly the environment bacteria need to multiply fast. The smell you're picking up isn't the grease itself, not really. It's the bacteria breaking that grease down and releasing sulfur compounds as a byproduct of digestion, essentially. That's the same family of compounds behind rotten egg smell, behind swamp gas, behind that unmistakable sour rot odor. That's why it hits your nose the way it does, sharp and unpleasant in a way food smells usually aren't. It's not just dirty, it's genuinely rotting right there under your sink. My grandfather used to say, the drain is the one part of the house nobody thinks about until it thinks about them. He was right. And I've never found a better way to put it. I've serviced sinks in restaurants where the kitchen looked spotless, stainless steel gleaming under fluorescent lights, not a speck of food on any surface, health inspector certificates hanging proudly on the wall. And the moment I opened up the trap under the 3-compartment sink, the smell hit like a wall. Grease doesn't care how clean your counters are. It builds where nobody's looking, and it builds regardless of how proud you are of the rest of the space. There's also a habit piece to this, and I want to be straight about it because I see it in almost every home I go into, no exceptions. People use their kitchen sink as the default place to get rid of anything liquid or semi-liquid without really thinking about what that liquid actually is. Coffee grounds with the last bit of cream, the last spoonful of gravy nobody wants to save, butter that's melted in the pan after cooking eggs, cooking oil after frying something poured out because the pan needs to go in the dishwasher. None of that is water. All of it is fuel for exactly the kind of buildup we're talking about, and all of it adds up faster than people expect. It's not one dramatic pour that causes the problem. It's the accumulation of 100 small ones over a year, each one so small it feels harmless in the moment. I'll add one more piece to this because it's something I don't think gets talked about enough. Cold weather makes this worse, and it makes it worse fast. In winter, the pipes under your sink, especially if they run along an exterior wall or through an unheated crawl space, are colder than they are in summer. That means grease solidifies faster once it hits the pipe, with less distance traveled before it turns solid. I get more calls for this exact problem in the months right after the holidays than any other time of year, and it's not a coincidence. Holiday cooking means more fat, more oil, more rich food going down the drain, combined with colder pipes that turn that fat solid almost immediately. If you've noticed the smell getting worse specifically in winter, now you know why. It's not your imagination, and it's not a separate issue. It's the same mechanism, just accelerated by temperature. I want to go through the things people try before they call someone like me, because I understand the instinct and I get why these methods seem like they should work on paper. They just don't hold up against what's actually happening inside that pipe, and knowing why they fail is almost as useful as knowing what actually works. Mistake 1. Dumping more dish soap or bleach down the drain. Dish soap is designed to break grease apart in an active wash. Hot water, agitation, contact time in a sink full of dishes where you're physically moving that soap around with a sponge or your hands. It is not designed to sit in a static pipe, undisturbed, and dissolve a hardened layer of solid fat that's already bonded to the plastic. Pouring soap down a still pipe is like squirting soap on a greasy pan and expecting it to clean itself without any scrubbing. It just sits on top, does very little, and washes away with the next flush of water. Bleach is even less useful here, and honestly, I'd say it's borderline counterproductive. Bleach kills bacteria and can mask odor for a short window, sometimes a day or two, which is exactly why people think it worked. But it does nothing to the grease itself, the actual physical material causing the problem. You're treating the smell, not the source. The grease is still sitting there exactly as thick as it was before. The bacteria population bounces back within days because the food source, the grease, never left, and the smell returns right on schedule, usually leaving the homeowner more frustrated than before because they genuinely thought they'd fixed it. Mistake 2, boiling water straight down the drain. This one actually makes sense on paper, and I understand why people reach for it. Hot water melts grease, so pour in more hot water, right? Logical enough. The problem is, by the time that water travels from your kettle to your sink and down through the trap, it's already lost a significant amount of its heat, especially in colder months when the pipe itself is cold and pulling heat out of the water on contact. It's rarely hot enough by the time it reaches the real buildup further down the line to do much more than soften the surface layer, maybe melt the very outer edge of the coating before it cools and re-solidifies just a little further along the pipe than where it started. So in some cases, you're not removing the grease at all, you're just relocating it slightly. And in other cases, if you've got older PVC piping, pouring truly boiling water down it repeatedly, week after week, can actually warp or weaken the joints over time, since PVC isn't rated for extended contact with water at true boiling temperature. I've seen loosened slip joints and even minor pipe deformation from homeowners who did this every week thinking they were being proactive and careful, when really they were slowly damaging their own plumbing without fixing the underlying problem. Mistake 3, relying on the garbage disposal to grind it away. The disposal chops solid food waste into smaller pieces so it can pass through the plumbing more easily without clogging. That's its entire job. It does not touch grease coating the inside of a pipe 6 inches or 6 feet away from the disposal itself, because the disposal only interacts with whatever's directly inside its chamber at that moment. Running the disposal longer just wears down the blades and motor for no benefit, and I've replaced more than a few disposals that burned out from homeowners running them for minutes at a time, trying to solve a smell problem that had nothing to do with the disposal at all. People also tend to run cold water while using the disposal, which is generally good practice because it helps solidify small bits of food for cleaner grinding, but it means any grease that does pass through the chamber is more likely to solidify faster once it's past the disposal and into the actual drain line, which somewhat ironically speeds up the exact buildup we're trying to avoid. I'll add a fourth one here too, because I see it constantly and it deserves a mention. Mistake 4, using a chemical drain cleaner meant for clogs, not odor. Those thick blue or purple gel cleaners you see at the hardware store are formulated to eat through hair and solid clogs using a strong caustic reaction. They generate heat as part of that reaction. Used on grease coating, that heat can actually help liquefy the top layer briefly, which is why some people report short-term improvement. But that liquefied grease often just runs a little further down the pipe before re-hardening in a new spot, sometimes in a harder-to-reach section than before. On top of that, repeated use of those cleaners on older pipes, especially older metal ones, can corrode the pipe walls over time, which is a separate and more expensive problem than the one you started with. Mistake 5, masking the smell instead of removing it. This is the one I probably see most often, honestly, more than any of the others. People buy a scented gel disc that sits in the drain, or a spray-in odor eliminator, or those little clip-on air fresheners for the sink area, and they treat the symptom entirely while ignoring the cause completely. I understand the appeal. It's cheap, it's fast, and it does genuinely make the kitchen smell better for a few hours, but it's the same idea as spraying perfume on a shirt you haven't washed in a month. The smell's covered for now, sure, but the actual source hasn't gone anywhere, and it's still sitting there doing exactly what it was doing before, growing a little more each day. Worse, I've noticed that people who rely on masking products tend to actually forget about the underlying problem entirely, sometimes for years, because the daily reminder, the smell itself, isn't there anymore to prompt them to deal with it. By the time they do finally address it, the buildup has often gotten considerably worse than it would have if the smell had just been left alone to nag at them from day one. The pattern with all 5 of these is the same, and it's worth repeating because it's the core idea of this whole video. They're addressing the smell where you can smell it, right at the sink opening, right where your nose is, instead of addressing where the grease actually lives, which is further down the pipe where none of these methods reach with any real force, contact time, or heat retention. You have to go to where the problem is, not throw something at the opening or spray something into the air above it and hope it travels far enough to matter. Here's the method I actually use, and it's the same one I'd use in my own kitchen, the same one I've used on jobs where the client had already spent money on 3 different products before calling me. I'm going to walk you through it step by step in the order I'd actually do it on a real job. Stage 1. Clear the trap manually. Before you treat anything chemically, you want physical access to where the worst of the buildup sits, which is almost always the P-trap, that U-shaped or J-shaped section of pipe directly under your sink, usually visible the moment you open the cabinet doors. Place a bucket underneath it because there will be standing water and some grease residue coming out the moment you loosen it, and you do not want that landing on the cabinet floor or your knees. Most traps have slip nut connections on either end that you can loosen by hand or with channel lock pliers if they're stuck from age or old sealant. Turn them counterclockwise, slow and steady, and be ready for the bucket to catch what's inside. Once it's off, you'll likely see exactly what I described earlier, a dark, waxy coating along the inside walls, sometimes lighter tan or yellow if the buildup is newer, sometimes almost black if it's been sitting for years. Don't be alarmed by how bad it looks. This is completely normal for a pipe that hasn't been serviced in a while, and it's exactly what we're here to deal with. Use an old bottle brush or a dedicated pipe brush, the kind with a long, flexible handle, sold cheap in any hardware store, to physically scrub the inside of that trap. This is the part everyone wants to skip because it's not glamorous, it's a little messy, and it takes actual effort with your hands. But it's the single most effective step in this whole process, more effective than any product you could pour in. No liquid product, no matter how strong the label claims it is, replaces direct mechanical scrubbing on hardened grease. Chemistry helps loosen things. Physical contact removes them. You need both, but if you only have time for one, this is the one that matters most. Rinse the trap out fully with hot water once you've scrubbed it, checking the inside visually to confirm you've gotten it back down to bare plastic or metal, not just knocked the surface layer off. Then, reattach it, hand tightening the slip nuts, and giving them a final quarter turn with pliers. Not more than that, or you risk cracking the nut or stripping the threads, which turns a simple cleaning job into an unexpected trip to the hardware store. Stage 2. Treat what's beyond the trap. The trap is only the section you can physically reach with your hands and a brush. Beyond it, the branch line runs further into the wall or floor, sometimes several feet before it joins the main stack, and that's where you need something that can travel and actually break down grease chemically, not just mask it or move it slightly further along the pipe. This is where I use a mix of baking soda and salt, followed by white vinegar, but with a technique most people get wrong, usually by rushing the timing or skipping the salt entirely because they don't understand what it's actually doing. Pour half a cup of baking soda down the drain dry, followed by half a cup of table salt, straight in behind it. The salt matters here because it adds abrasive texture that helps physically scour the pipe walls as the mixture moves through with the water later, something baking soda alone doesn't do nearly as well on its own. Baking soda is a mild alkaline that helps neutralize some of the fatty acids in the grease, but it needs that abrasive partner to actually help dislodge material from the pipe surface rather than just reacting with it chemically and doing nothing mechanically. Let that sit for about 10 minutes untouched. Don't run any water yet. Don't be tempted to check on it by running the tap. Just leave it alone. Then pour in 1 cup of white vinegar, poured slowly and evenly rather than dumped all at once. You'll get the fizzing reaction immediately, and that's fine. That's expected. But the real work isn't the fizz itself, it's the acid in the vinegar breaking down the mineral and grease bond on the pipe surface underneath all that foam. The fizzing is really just a visual sign the reaction is happening. It's not the mechanism doing the actual cleaning. Let the whole mixture sit for a full 20 minutes, no shorter. I know that feels like a long time to wait around, but the contact time is what allows the acid to actually work on hardened material rather than just splashing past it. Set a timer if you have to, because guessing at 10 minutes instead of 20 is one of the most common reasons this method underperforms for people at home. Then follow it with a steady stream of hot tap water, not boiling, just as hot as your tap runs, for the reasons we talked about earlier with boiling water losing heat too fast, for a full 2 minutes straight. That extended hot water flush is what actually carries the loosened grease the rest of the way through the system, instead of just moving it a foot further down the pipe and leaving it there to re-harden in a new location. Stage 3. Prevent it from rebuilding. Once it's clean, the job isn't done, because if your habits stay the same, you'll be back here in 4 to 6 months doing this all over again. Keep a sealed container, an old coffee can with a lid, or any jar you don't mind getting a little greasy, next to the stove for grease and oil disposal instead of the sink. Let it cool for a few minutes after cooking, pour it in, and toss the whole container once it's full instead of pouring anything down the drain. For smaller amounts, like what's left in a pan after cooking eggs or bacon, wipe it out with a paper towel before you ever rinse the pan underwater. That single habit change on its own removes probably 80% of the grease that would otherwise end up building inside your pipes over the course of a year. I'd also suggest doing a lighter version of stage 2, just the baking soda and vinegar part. Skip the trap removal. Once a month as maintenance rather than waiting for the smell to come back and treating it as an emergency each time. A pipe that's lightly maintained monthly almost never gets to the point where you need to pull the trap apart at all. It's much easier to prevent a thick buildup than it is to remove one once it's already established. Pro tip. Once a week, not once a month, run your hottest tap water for about 30 seconds right after you're done cooking for the night, before anything has a chance to cool and settle on its own. Grease that's still warm and still moving is grease that doesn't get the chance to bond to the pipe wall in the first place. This is the step almost nobody does because it feels unnecessary in the moment, like an extra chore tacked onto an already long day of cooking and cleaning, but it's the difference between a trap that needs cleaning every few months and one that stays clear for a year or more without any smell at all. I picked this habit up watching my father do it without even thinking about it, just part of closing down the kitchen for the night before bed. And it saved me more service calls to my own house than anything else on this list combined. It costs you 30 seconds and a little extra hot water. Compare that to pulling a trap apart every few months, and it's not even close which one's easier. Stage 4. Don't forget the disposal chamber itself. If you've got a garbage disposal, there's one more spot worth addressing while you're already in there working on this, because it's connected to the same overall system, even though it's not technically the trap. Grease and food particles cling to the inside walls of the disposal chamber, just below where you can see when you look down the drain. With the power to the disposal switched off at the breaker, not just the wall switch, drop in a handful of ice cubes along with a cup of rock salt and run it briefly. The ice, ground up against the chamber walls, does a rough scouring job, similar to what the salt does in the pipe below, knocking loose grease and grime that's clinging to the sides. Follow that with half a lemon, rind and all, ground up the same way, which helps with odor and cuts through some of the remaining residue with its acidity. This isn't a replacement for stages 1 through 3, it's a supplement, addressing a different section of the same overall system that a lot of people forget exists separately from the trap. Once all 4 stages are done, it's worth doing a quick check every couple of months, rather than waiting for the smell to announce itself again. Run the hot water for a minute, lean down, and just smell near the drain opening. If you catch even a faint version of that odor starting to return, that's your sign to run the lighter maintenance version of stage 2 before it has the chance to build back up to where you started. Catching it early is always easier than catching it late. That's true of almost every plumbing problem I've ever dealt with, and this one's no exception. There's one step in stage 1 that people skip constantly, and it's the one that actually matters most: the manual scrubbing. Everyone wants the chemical shortcut, and I get it. Standing there with a brush, scrubbing the inside of a greasy pipe isn't anyone's idea of a good afternoon. But skip that brush, and you're just rearranging the problem, not solving it. You're moving grease from one spot to another, not removing it from the system. And here's something most people don't realize until it's too late. If you've got a garbage disposal, the smell can actually be coming from buildup on the underside of the splash guard, that rubber flap you see right at the top of the disposal opening, not the pipe further down at all. We'll get into a separate fix for that another time, but it's worth checking before you assume it's all pipe related and go tearing into the trap for nothing. One more thing worth knowing. If the smell is stronger on one side of a double basin sink, that tells you something specific about where the buildup is concentrated on that particular branch line, and it can save you from tearing apart the wrong section of pipe entirely, wasting time on the side that's actually fine. And here's one that catches almost everyone off guard. The smell can travel through your dishwasher too, since most dishwashers drain into the same line as your sink through a shared connection. If you've deep cleaned your sink trap and the smell is still hanging around, especially right after a dishwasher cycle finishes, that shared line is worth checking before you assume you did something wrong with the sink itself. That's the real fix, not the one-time trick that works for a weekend and quietly fails you a month later, but the routine that actually keeps the smell from coming back at all. If this helped you figure out where that smell was really coming from, subscribe, because I've got more of these breakdowns coming from 20 years of doing this work, not just repeating what I read somewhere online. Drop a comment and tell me what's driving you crazy in your own kitchen or bathroom right now. There's a good chance I've dealt with it before on a job somewhere and can point you in the right direction. And if your garbage disposal has been making noise or smells like it's got something stuck in it, even after you've cleaned everything else, go watch the video I did on cleaning under the splash guard, because that's usually connected to exactly what we just covered here today.